Hi, I'm Chris Higgins, and this is Stories of the Humber River. My guest today is John Maniezzo. John was born in Italy and came to Canada early in his life. Like me, he's a former teacher with a keen interest in history, especially concerning the West End of Toronto, where we both live. John stokes the fires of several Facebook groups to the delight of many members and engages them in fascinating daily discussions. When he's not sharing photos and telling illuminating stories, John enjoys spending time with his family, especially his grandchildren. Welcome to the podcast, John.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
Now this part is a surprise. I thought it would be fun to play a quick round of
Quiz the Teacher,
the historical version. Are you up for it, John?
I'm up for it. Let's see what I can do.
Okay. This is a 10-question rapid-fire warm-up for our interview. Are you ready?
I think I am.
Okay, here we go. Human habitation in the Toronto area goes back approximately how many thousand years? 1, 10, or 100?
Oh, yeah, I would say 10,000 years would be about it.
That is correct. Second question. The ancient indigenous route along the Humber River from Lake Ontario to points north is called?
Toronto Carrying Place.
It's hard to stump the teacher. The next one. What year, these are easy for you, did the young French explorer Etienne Brulé first see what we now call Lake Ontario?
1615.
Next question. What name did John Graves Simcoe change Toronto to in 1793?
The town of York.
What do historians call the indigenous village that was located where the Babby Point neighborhood is today?
Tayayagon.
What did the French build at that location in 1720?
Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. I love these questions. The Magazine Royale.
The Humber is navigable to which one of Toronto's main streets?
Bloor Street.
What terrible disaster occurred on the Humber River and other low-lying areas of Toronto in 1954?
There was Hurricane Hazel.
What regional body is responsible for the watershed connected to the Humber River?
That you got me.
I'm glad that at least there was one. It's the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority. Last question. What former military road is the city thinking about renaming?
Dundas Street.
Well, John, that was fantastic. You got 9 out of 10. Had you gotten 10 out of 10, you would have won $1 million. But unfortunately, I didn't mention that to you. I didn't want to put pressure.
You know, John, one of the cooler dudes in history for me is Etienne Brulé. He was so young, and yet he was the first European to see the Humber River and Toronto. But his own boss, Champlain, and the church had both really soured on him toward the end of his life. What do we think of him now in 2021?
He never wrote anything. So it was written by others. What were their motives? I don't know. But when I moved in the Humber Bay area on the Etobicoke side, there was a school there called Humber Bay Public School. And after a while, after my research, I found out before it was called Brulé Public School. But along the way, somehow somebody talked them into changing the name. So there we go. Brulé Public School was changed to Humber Bay School. Fair enough. Till later on, the school was torn down by this time, and a new school was put up. Guess what they called it? Brulé Public School.
Speaking of changing names, John Graves Simcoe changed a few in his time here too. What were his motivations?
As soon as he came over here, he didn't want any reminders of the French here, so the names were changed. Lake Toronto, T-A-R-O-N-T, Toronto, came the Toronto River. So the Humber on the map shows it as Toronto River. Now we have Jean-Baptiste Rousseau, who piloted John Graves Simcoe Mississauga baton or ship to the harbor, and that they used to call it Saint Jean Creek rather than river because it was just as part. But that was the name of the Toronto River by the bay. He comes along, and as a good British, what does he do? He names it at Humber and the Don. Before I went to England to teach on exchange in 1980, I never knew that there was a Don and a Humber River in England. So I'm right by the Humber and the Don River. This is in Hull, England. So jokingly in the staff, I used to say, hey, you guys took our names, eh? Of course, they said, get your history straight. Well, that's what we get. And a lot of the names here, a lot of the streets originally in the town of York were named after kings and their wives and so on, then changed.
Who was John Graves Simcoe, and what do we know about him?
John Graves Simcoe was a soldier. Served here during the American Revolution. As a matter of fact, I read someplace they even shot George Washington's army. I think he was either caught in prison or he wasn't well, and then he went back to England. He was still a soldier, but he served as a member of Parliament for a couple of years. So he comes here in 1792 and leaves in 1796. Now that's not 4 years, that's 5 because he served 92 to this. So, but 4 of those years were in charge of York. So that's a short period of time. And to accomplish what he did. The question is, what were his orders and what was he going to accomplish? 2. Simple one was to reinforce the British way of life, the structure, which they fought against the Americans. The revolution, they wanted what they called democracy or republicanism. So he wanted to keep that.
Now, there were 3 streets, I believe, in Toronto named after John Graves Simcoe. 2 of them survive, John and Simcoe. What about the other one?
John Graves Simcoe, Lieutenant Governor. He is given names of a street, yet one name was changed. And it wasn't political. People didn't like to live on Graves Street. So there was a change of name, which logistically makes sense.
John, recently, Toronto City Council decided to change the name of Dundas Street. Leaving aside the politics of that, what's the history of the street itself?
Dundas Street, many don't know, began at Kingston as a military road, came just about to the outskirts of Toronto. They weren't sure which route to follow. But let's go back in Toronto itself, right by what was the asylum at Ossington and Queen. That's where it's located now. Dundas Street started right there at Queen, which was Lot Street, because the garrison is just nearby there. So Dundas started from there, went up to where presently you can turn west and on. And then as soon as you got out of the city, it went down along the Iroquois Escarpment, through Dundas, the town, and then Simcoe, who wanted London to be the capital, it went up through London and down to the British military post, which was in Detroit, and just beside there was Sandwich, which was Windsor.
So that road is still there, and so is something else that got made right around that time. The Toronto Purchase.
The treaty was really a land grab, put it this way. It was a misunderstanding. They thought they were allowing people to settle, just like I mentioned before, in the little villages, then move on to another place. In other words, it wasn't a piece of land that Simcoe gave me, and then I could sell that land to somebody else or cut it up in pieces and so on. And this is what happened. Nobody knew for certain what they actually meant. The boundaries were never clear because we talked in terms of meridians and longitude, surveying and latitude. They just took the rivers as boundaries.
John, The narrative about the Humber always used to be that the mills were models of industry and progress. Is that still how we see things?
And they were models, but they were not just models of industry, they were models of survival. Now picture yourself, and I'll use William Cooper's up here because it's just north of us, 1806. He starts off a mill, he has a few workers, he needs, again, cooperage. They are the ones that made the circular things that went around the barrel. And then they needed good boots, belts, suspenders, so you need a tanner, you need whoever worked with leather, and then you needed other people, you needed a store, etc., etc., etc. So as a matter of survival in this country at that time, these persons that contributed their talents later on also went on to develop the town of York and Toronto and so on. Down here, Milton Mills, which is the old mill, they had at least 200 people with all different abilities and trades that they can contribute.
With all this development, you can just picture a lot of changes to the landscape.
When the King's Mill was opened in 1793, and it was a lumber mill, they needed lumber to build the garrison and also for homes in York, town of York. Now, what does lumber do when you cut it up? Create sawdust. Where does this sawdust go? In the Humber. What happened to the salmon? So yeah, this is a problem, and it wasn't just sawdust. And when we started having these tanneries, where do you think the pelts ended up, or the dyes? We weren't as ecological aware at the time, maybe, of the problems. One thing for certain that I would attribute as a major cause was taxation. They didn't have people here to tax. And you know what? You guys saw your garbage out today? Well, because you pay tax and it gets taken away. I'm going to ask you, what would you do if today and for a week or a month with the garbage truck? Where does the garbage go? Remember placing them in the tennis courts? I remembered, since we're talking about the Humber, they were placed at the parking lot, appropriately named ATM Brule.
You've just reminded me of a question I love to ask people. Have you ever gone for a swim in the Humber?
Wouldn't call it swimming. A friend of mine did. He called it Bare Ass Beach, which is right on the Scarlet, just south of the Humber. Obviously, there was a sandy beach there, and it's shown on the map. Some went in Black Creek in the Humber to collect golf balls. That's not quite swimming, but you're in. But in the 30s and 40s, there were information going out to parents of students at Roselands about the spread of cholera, ear infections, eyes infection, okay? Now, I live right north of Black Creek. By living north of Black Creek made me a Mount Dennis boy, by the way. But I called myself a Jane Park Plaza lad. So there was a water filtration plant, and I remember, picture this, I'm 12 years old or 13, going there and seeing condoms floating down from this place along Black Creek. I didn't know what condoms were. Of course, I learned very quickly from others in the school. Floating down Black Creek to the Humber. But I've fallen into Black Creek. I don't think I got anything of it. But I did go once by bike. I tell you, now you brought up a memory. Rode all the way up to Jane and Finch, where Black Creek crosses, just south of there. And it was so pure, the water, it seems. It was among all these trees. We rode our bikes, and I went in. We took our clothes off, and we just waded. It wasn't that deep, but it was cooling. So there were places which I probably would say, I wouldn't recommend it, especially now.
John, I think we're almost out of time. I'm wondering, we all know the cliche about history being deadly and boring. But as you can see in the news today, it's more relevant than ever. How can the Humber River and the trails and the paths along it help us understand not only where we've come from, but perhaps where we're going?
I don't know how to get the history out, but it has to be concise, brief, and of relevancy. I love the paths. I might as well plug this in. Since I'm a Mount Dennis boy, John Dennis had his shipyard over on the east side south of Bloor. And every time I walk the west side where I live and I look over, that's the first thing I think about. I go, wow, this is something that he built a ship here, the Toronto yacht, about 1799. People have asked me, how did he get it down the Humber? Well, it was navigable. Plus, I don't think the draft below it was that much. But so every time I walk the Humber, every time I drive through Toronto with my Toronto district, I see Toronto in a different light. I wonder the hardship my dad went through and other immigrants. I wonder the struggles Indigenous people are going through because of the injustices. I'm learning more about that lately, though. So yeah, the Humber special, and I think that the Humber itself, the history of the Humber, has contributed to Toronto. So if people don't take advantage to at least learn some of it, they're missing out.
John Maniezzo, thank you so much for taking the time with us today.
Okay, Chris, thanks. Okay.
This has been Stories of the Humber River. I'm Chris Higgins. Thank you. Bye-bye.